Hey guys, what's up? I'm Erin and welcome back to the channel. How much money do you need in order to be considered rich? I bet when you hear that question, a number pops into your mind. So if you could, take a moment and write your thoughts in a comment down below because I'm curious what this number is for you. And while you're there, hit the subscribe button because it really does help the channel. I bet we all have a different number that comes to mind, but for most of us, I think it's safe to say it's probably a pretty high number. And the thing is, even when we go to reputable sources, the answer to this question is really all over the place. When you sift through the data, you first have to decide when you're talking about rich or wealth, are you going to be considering income, or are you talking about net worth, or is it a combination of the two? And maybe you have a strong opinion on this. If we want to talk about it from a stance of net worth, someone who has $1 million or 7 figures of liquid investable assets, they are generally labeled as a high net worth individual. So someone who has $1 million net worth excluding their primary residence. Now this metric is really set by the brokerage houses, and it's no surprise that they tend to put a heavier emphasis on investable assets because the value of your home or how much equity you have in your home is of no interest to Fidelity or Vanguard or any other brokerage house. What they care about is how much you can invest. The next category up from a high net worth individual becomes a very high net worth individual. And I love the creativity with these names, but that threshold comes around a net worth of $5 to $10 million. The next category up from that is an ultra high net worth individual, and that's a threshold with a net worth of $30 million or more. And while those may be very high or ultra high, or maybe we could just simply say aspirationally high net worths, whatever label you want to slap on it, safe to say those are pretty difficult or high net worths to achieve. But when the question is asked to the typical American of what net worth makes you feel wealthy, they say that feeling of wealth would hit somewhere around $2.2 million. So for many, that feeling of wealth or rich tends to come beyond what the traditional brokerage houses consider to be a high net worth individual or a high net worth family. And based on the comment section I see here on YouTube, I would say most people tend to agree with that. Hitting the first 7 figures in investable assets is absolutely a phenomenal threshold. But I do know so many people still view this as being able to sustain ultimately a comfortable middle class life, especially once you start to apply something like a safe rate of withdrawal on this amount in investments. Say you use a 4% rate of withdrawal, that would give you $40,000 a year. You combine that with something like a pension or Social Security, and that does give you a solid, comfortable lifestyle, but nothing lavish. Now, maybe these arbitrary benchmarks of a net worth that it takes to be considered rich in America doesn't satisfy curiosity. In the past, I had done a video on incomes and net worths of high net worth individuals that was very well received on the channel. So let's go over the net worth of the top 10%, 5%, and 1%, because it's safe to say that a handful of people in this category should be considered rich. I think when you hit the top 10 percentile, that's when you start to see net worths that are typically classified as wealthy, but perhaps many might still describe as middle class wealthy, something that's attainable through a lifetime of savings and investments. And you'll notice that as you go into the top 5 percentile, and even more so going into the top 1% of each age bracket, that's when you start to see wealth levels jump exponentially. But what about income? If we look at it from the perspective of income, what's the income that you would need to be rich? Well, if we look at data from the Federal Reserve, to be in the top 1% of all income earners, you would need an annual income of $500,000. That's an income of nearly $42,000 a month. However, if we consider data from the Economic Policy Research Institute, who uses a different baseline to measure the threshold for income percentiles, in order to be in the top 1%, an individual would have to have an income of nearly $820,000 per year. Broken down on a monthly basis, that's about $68,000 a month. And again, if we were to break it down by percentile, looking at the top 10%, the top 5%, and the top 1% of all income earners, we see the strides going from the top 10% to the top 5% makes a significant jump. But going from the top 5% to the top 1%, well, incomes are nearly doubling at that point. Again, we just see this exponential growth when we're going to the top 1%. Now, I think we can take a moment to say that those are amazing incomes. And if you have an income that puts you in the top 10%, the top 5%, or the top 1%, that should make it much easier to set aside something for investments and savings and to build wealth. Of course, it's not a guarantee because it really depends on your burn rate and how much you're spending, but it should make it exponentially easier to build wealth. Now, if I'm being honest, I don't really like any of these definitions of rich. I don't strictly like using an income that puts you in a top percentile or a net worth that puts you in a top percentile because there's so many factors to consider. It depends on where you live, it depends on your family size, and so many other factors. There's so many what ifs you can throw into this situation, and trust me, I see the comments, people do. But I was recently listening to a podcast with Scott Galloway, an NYU professor, amazing speaker, an amazing author, and I thought he gave what is quite possibly the best definition of rich I ever heard. He defines wealth and rich as having passive income that is greater than your burn rate. In other words, you're rich if your passive income is greater than your expenses. There are two key takeaways from this definition of rich. The first is that your passive income is larger than your burn rate. Now, when I tend to think of passive income, I tend to think about investments. So I would think about having a portfolio that generates an income that covers all of your expenses and then some. And I think that investing is pretty much the most passive activity you can have. This could also come if you have a pension that covers all of your expenses, or even an annuity. I could go out on a limb and say rental income, but I don't want to say that being a landlord is a passive activity. I don't think it is by any stretch. So I do think that's a great route to go, and I don't want to discredit that because you can certainly generate a great income from rental properties, but I don't think landlords have a passive activity. The other piece is that your income is greater than your expenses. Read here that you're living below your means. So when you have passive income that is coming in a way that meets all of your necessary expenses and all of your wants, well, then you're rich. And one of the reasons I love this definition so much is that it speaks to the reality that it is possible to feel rich on a broad range of incomes and at a broad range of net worths, just as it is easy to spend your money and live paycheck to paycheck on a broad range of incomes. It really all depends on your lifestyle and your expenses. If you live a lifestyle where your expenses are $50,000 a year and you have passive income of $60,000 a year, you're rich. You have an annual $10,000 a year surplus. You get to live the lifestyle that you want. On the other end of the spectrum, let's say we have an individual who has passive income of $200,000 a year. But let's say that their expenses are $300,000 a year. This individual is not rich. Every year, they're $100,000 in the red. They can't walk away from their job. So you're rich when your passive income is greater than your expenses. I love that definition. I believe in that definition. The minute all of your expenses are covered by passive income sources, when you're no longer required to go to work because you need the paycheck, that's when you get to live the rich life. I think we would all be a little bit better off if we used Professor Galloway's definition of rich because it makes it more attainable and more realistic to more people. And the easiest path to getting there, to building wealth, to becoming rich is to get invested. Get invested as early as you possibly can. The younger, the better, and stay consistent. And compounding will be your best friend on this journey. So what are your thoughts? What is rich? Leave your thoughts in a comment down below. I post new videos every single week. If you got anything at all out of this one, please give it a like. If you're new here, please consider subscribing, or if you know of someone who might get something out of this type of content, please consider sharing. I'll see you soon. Bye. Where's low gloss? Okay, hi. I'm gonna get there. Oh my gosh. Guarantee it depends. But I was calm down. Jeez. But it's very possible to feel rich and